Welcome to my YouTube channel, Mark at A Matter of Truth. All of my Bible teaching songs are based upon my sound biblical Bible studies on my website at thechurchofthefirstborn.net.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a literal textual detective story. We're going to look closely at how just one single, seemingly straightforward sentence from an ancient manuscript has sparked an absolute firestorm of debate for centuries. It's actually a brilliant case study in how interpretation completely shapes our worldviews. And just so you know, we're going to break down this evidence strictly through the lens of our source material, analyzing the clues word by word. Here's our quick roadmap for today. We'll hit the Colossians controversy, look at 4 differing interpretations, define the word firstborn, map out the biblical Unitarian timeline, and wrap up with the power of context. Let's get right into it.
Starting with part 1, the Colossians controversy. Let's set the stage.
I want you to just think about this for a second. Can one single sentence genuinely generate 4 completely different realities? It sounds impossible, right? No way, but honestly, what's so fascinating about textual analysis, especially when you're dealing with ancient, translated texts, is that the assumptions you bring to a single word can completely alter the entire reality being described. And our source material today shows us exactly how that happens.
Here is the verse in question. It's Colossians 1:15, taken from the King James Version. It reads, "Who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature." Now, I want you to mentally highlight 2 words in that sentence, image and firstborn. These 2 words are absolutely crucial. They're the pivotal clues in our detective story today. Does image mean a literal copy or just a reflection? And does firstborn mean the very first thing created at the literal beginning of time, or does it mean something else entirely?
Which brings us to part 2, 4 differing interpretations. Let's zoom out a bit.
This brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the debate. Our source material maps out a matrix of 4 completely distinct theological camps. First up, we've got the Trinitarian view. They argue that firstborn doesn't mean Jesus is actually part of creation, but rather it indicates his priority and total sovereignty over it, meaning he has literally always existed. Next is the Oneness Pentecostal perspective. They read firstborn strictly as a title of honor, arguing he was born about 4,000 years after Adam. Then there's the Jehovah's Witness interpretation. They take it quite literally to mean he was the very first spirit creature made by God way before Adam. And finally, the biblical Unitarian view, which our source text actually passionately advocates for. This view argues that firstborn strictly means first in time, but, and this is key, it specifically refers to being born from the dead, meaning his human birth had to come first. So 4 completely different realities, all pulled from one sentence. It really shows how defining a single term cascades into how you view the entire text.
Moving on to part 3, defining the word firstborn. Time for a little linguistic breakdown.
So our first crucial word is icon, which gets translated as image in English. And yep, it's the exact same root where we get our modern computer icons. What's really interesting here is how the source explains the honest Pentecostal argument. They suggest that, in our modern language, an icon is just a representation. It's not the actual substance. Because of that, they interpret image to mean a visible manifestation of the invisible God presented to created beings, rather than being the literal substance of God himself. But the ultimate controversy, the whole shebang, hinges on one specific Greek word, prototokos. In English, this translates to firstborn or first begotten. Our source points out that this specific word appears exactly 9 times in the New Testament. And how you define this single, solitary word dictates everything about how you understand the nature of the figure being described.
So it really boils down to a massive contrast between 2 definitions. Mainstream views like the Trinitarian perspective often define prototokos here as first in rank, basically a title of supreme honor and sovereignty over creation. However, our source author, arguing from that biblical Unitarian perspective, insists that in all 9 biblical instances, the context demands it means first in time, like a strict chronological order of actual events.
All right, part 4. The biblical Unitarian timeline. Let's see how this chronology builds. The source actually provides a very clear timeline to explain this. Step 1, the human son is born. Step 2, the events of the cross take place. Step 3 comes the resurrection. And listen, this is the pivotal moment in this specific theology. The author argues that it is right here, when Jesus is raised from the dead, that he is begotten. And finally, in glorification, he actually becomes the firstborn of a new creation and is granted immortality. In this specific view, Jesus didn't exist as the firstborn in eternity past. Instead, he achieved that status sequentially, after the resurrection.
And finally, part 5, The power of context. Let's look at the cross-references.
Check out how the author uses this verse from Revelation 1:5. It describes Jesus as the first begotten of the dead. The author asks a really fascinating logical question here. Why would he be called the first begotten specifically out of the dead if he was already the literal firstborn creature at the dawn of the universe? The argument here links the term firstborn directly and exclusively to the act of rising from the grave.
They build on that with Romans 8:29. This verse says believers are predestined to be conformed to the image of the Son, making him the firstborn among many brethren. The source's logic is pretty straightforward. If followers are going to be conformed to that exact same image, then firstborn simply means he was the very first human to achieve this new, immortal, glorified state, basically paving the way for others to follow.
The author totally solidifies this chronological argument by breaking down a sequence from Hebrews chapter 1. First, sins are purged. Second, sitting down at the right hand of majesty. Third, being made better than the angels. And fourth, obtaining a more excellent name by inheritance. The author places massive emphasis on those verbs, made and obtained. The whole argument is that you literally cannot obtain something you already possessed from the beginning of time. Therefore, he was made in the express image of God after the events of the cross.
All of these textual clues lead us to the source's grand theological conclusion, the why behind all of this. According to this biblical Unitarian view, the ultimate purpose was that Yahweh created a human son specifically to elevate him. By having a human conquer death and become a lord and king, God could then use him to judge Satan and the fallen angels, effectively stilling his enemies through a newly immortalized human proxy. Now, whether you agree with this theology or not, you have to admit, it shows a radically different way of viewing the biblical narrative.
And that brings us to the end of our textual investigation of the source material today. But I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. If firstborn indeed means the first human to conquer death, rather than a being created before the universe even existed, how does that change the way you read the rest of this ancient text? It's a really powerful reminder that when we study history and ancient manuscripts, redefining a single word can literally re-engineer the entire universe being described. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking those great questions.
Please read the in-depth Bible studies on my websites at AMatterOfTruth and thechurchofthefirstborn.net. And if you like this Bible teaching song video, then please share the link with others. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you richly for sharing the true gospel. Brother Mark.